But I have a dragon.
Oh, you have it.
But he didn't come.
Hi, my name is Paris Miller. I am originally from Durham, North Carolina in the United States of America. I was born and raised as a Christian. My mother and father divorced when I was about 3 years old, so I lived with my mother, and so any religious teachings I pretty much got from my mom. She wasn't extremely strict in terms of religion, but she considered herself to be Catholic more than anything, even though I did frequent Methodist, Baptist church. I went to undergraduate school in Greensboro, North Carolina, and that's when my journey towards Islam began. I didn't know it at the time, but it started then. When I was an undergrad, all freshmen were required to take Old and New Testament. That was the first time I'd ever started to study the Bible from a non-religious perspective, if I can call it that. I would say that it was very intellectual, more on an academic level. And we started with the Old Testament first. And that was very interesting to me because as a Christian, you really focus a lot on the New Testament and Jesus. That within Christianity, there were supposed to be laws and ways in which Christians were supposed to live their daily lives. I didn't see that growing up. I never practiced a lot of the things that I read in the Old Testament. The oneness of God was very clear to me in the Old Testament. And that was in great contrast to what I saw in the New Testament. The New Testament was void of law and how a Christian was supposed to live their daily life. Of course, within Christian teachings, there don't steal, don't lie, don't commit murder, all of these things. But the actual day-to-day worship of God, your relationship with God, how do you cultivate that? It was missing for me. Fast forward, and I'm in graduate school, and I'm engaged to be married. And so my journey to wanting to be a wife and ultimately a mother led me and my soon-to-be husband to the church. And so we started this journey of trying to find a church to get married in and to help us in the counseling of marriage and raising a family. And as we went from church to church, we were disillusioned. That's the best way to describe it. We were truly disillusioned. We didn't like what we saw in the church. I remember very specifically being invited to one of my husband's co-workers' churches. His father was the pastor, and he had like an entourage. And it was such a turnoff for us because it was more about personalities and less for us about our relationship with God, how we could connect with God. So we decided that we were going to read the Bible for ourselves one more time, just to get to the bottom of what it is that we believed. While I was in grad school, I was working part-time, and in comes a Muslim lady. And I explained to her what my husband and I were doing. We were reading the Bible, and because she had converted to Islam, she understood a lot of what I was going through. She even invited me to the masjid, and I remember my first, in anticipation of going to the masjid for the first time, I sat up all night long and I made my first hijab. And I walked out and I had it on, and it felt perfect. I had my first Ramadan Eid, which is the end of Ramadan, the celebration that Muslims have. It was on my birthday. So that was like really cool for me, having that experience. But again, my fiance, he wasn't Muslim yet. My husband, fiance at the time, he had started going to the masjid, going to Jummah prayer, talking to my co-worker's husband who was Muslim, and he embraced Islam as well. So it was like this great gift given to me. And my conversion to Islam was very intellectual. Upon reading the Quran, learning more about Islam, how the pieces of the puzzle all the holes that were there for me as a Christian were filled. It settled in my heart and situation. It was so peaceful. It was like, aha, that makes sense. It really made sense. And specifically around the personage of Jesus. The biggest concerns that I had was, number one, not rejecting Jesus. And Islam doesn't. Another thing that was a concern for me was finances, because I know in Islam we don't really engage in interest, and living in the West, that's how things operate a lot with interest. And so as I learned more, I learned how to navigate that and what that meant for me as a Muslim. Embracing Islam has made me a more conscious person, a more mindful person. I have to be mindful in my dealings with my fellow brother or sister, in faith or out of faith, who are Muslims and non-Muslims. I have to think about my relationship with my family in a different way. But in Islam, especially when it comes to the mother, she just is raised to such a height, and it's about what you can do and give for that person in many ways. It becomes I became less self-centered. The ego is a big thing. It has allowed me to see myself as an individual, but also as a part of the group. And as an individual, I have a responsibility to the group. And I also see that the group has a responsibility to me. Speaking kind words, giving a smile, all of those things just become second nature. Focus on one thing, and that is your relationship with God. That's the best advice that I could give you.